So today we're going to talk all about managers. Number one, how we find good managers, create good managers, develop those managers. We're doing that through a conversation with a very good friend of mine, a guy named Stephen Bloom. Stephen is the general manager of Il Buco restaurant in Manhattan. It's in the NoHo neighborhood. He's got a really phenomenal resume. He and I worked together first, 11 or 12 years ago. We've been friends ever since. Very, very accomplished. He's just a low-key demeanor, very humble, and I think he's a really thoughtful, generous manager. And he's really good at developing talent. So I wanted to bring him on the show so we could talk about how you do that, how you develop talent. All that and more on today's episode of Restaurant Strategy. There's an old saying that goes something like this. You'll only find three kinds of people in the world. Those who see, those who will never see, and those who can see when shown. This is Restaurant Strategy, a podcast with answers for anyone who's looking. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. My name is Chip Close, and this is Restaurant Strategy, a podcast dedicated solely to helping you build a more profitable restaurant. Each week, I leverage my 20-plus years in the industry to help you build that more profitable and more sustainable business. I also work directly with operators all over the world through my P3 Mastermind program. We just launched a brand new group. So now we filled 2 groups, closed those 2 groups, or opening a 3rd group. We're doing it because the program works. To date, we've put more than 100 people through that program. The impact we're making is real. So listen, if you've got a busy restaurant but struggle to generate consistent, predictable 20% profits, then please set up a free 30-minute strategy session with someone from my team. We'll get to learn more about you and your restaurant. You'll get to ask some questions about the program to see if you're a good fit for that program. Visit restaurantstrategypodcast.com/schedule. As always, you'll find that link in the show notes. Now, we all know managing costs is one of the most important parts of running a profitable restaurant, especially now. But between fluctuating vendor prices, waste, labor, and the never-ending list of tasks that demand your attention on a daily basis, it can be challenging for even the most experienced of us to manage those costs well. That's where MarginEdge comes in. MarginEdge is a complete restaurant management software that automatically uses data from your POS and invoices to show you your food and labor costs in real time. Don't wait until it's too late. MarginEdge gives you tools to make decisions in the moment, like a daily P&L, price alerts on key ingredients, and real-time plate costs, all without ever having to touch a spreadsheet. Take control of your costs, work more efficiently, and be more profitable. Learn more at marginedge.com/chip. And yes, that link is in the show notes. Now, as I said at the top, my guest on today's show is a guy named Stephen Bloom. He's the general manager of Il Buco restaurant in the NoHo neighborhood of Manhattan. He and I first worked together almost 12 years ago. We've been friends ever since. He's gone on to put together an incredible resume, really managing top-notch Michelin star properties. And today he wanted to come on the show, and we talked about what we were going to discuss. And we're going to talk all about management. Before we do that, let's welcome to the show Stephen. Good to have you.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
My pleasure. So you've worked all over. Right now, you are the general manager at Il Buco restaurant in Manhattan in the NoHo neighborhood. How long have you been there?
So I've been at Il Buco for about a year and a half now, but I've been in the industry for about 20 years at this point.
That's right. So we worked together way back. I guess we started working together in 2012, so more than 10 years ago.
We did.
And we worked together for a while, and you eventually left there to go take your first management job, which sort of goes hand in hand with what we wanted to talk about today. So full disclosure to the people listening, Stephen and I kept saying, hey, we want to try and do an episode. There's a lot that we could talk about, but we have to give some direction to the conversation. And I said, hey, what do you want to talk about? And you said, hey, let's talk about managers, specifically young managers, how we find them, how we bring them along, how we develop them and make them into really good or better managers, into great managers. And I was like, yeah, we really haven't covered that before. So I thought the conversation was a good one. So we'll see if that bears out over the next hour. Talk to me about, so when you made the jump from waiting tables or captaining at a fine dining restaurant over into management for the first time, talk to me about that. Talk to me about that experience, because obviously this is personal for you. There's something you feel like there's something that the industry could do better. And I know we've talked about this offline, but I'll let you sort of go into this. Talking about your experience, start there, your experience of managing for the first time.
I remember when I moved on to the management side of things from serving and from food running and from, busing. I remember that, the desire to do it and the belief in doing it came about very suddenly. I had been working in restaurants for about 10 years up to that point, and I hadn't really given much thought to the management side of things, but I had worked with a friend who was my manager. I met him when he was managing me in a different restaurant, and we were working together in a subsequent restaurant after that. And he was a great guy. He had a very, very Brooklyn accent, very, very thick Brooklyn accent. He bore a very passing resemblance to Robert De Niro. He had the mole on his cheek and everything. And I remember one day he pulled me aside and he said, with this very thick Brooklyn accent, he said, "Let me ask you a question." It was almost like De Niro. He said, "You think you could do my job?" And at first I got a little insulted. I said, I'm not trying to contradict anything you're saying on the floor. He said, no, you think you could do my job? And what I realized was that he wasn't pulling a De Niro and Raging Bull. He was actually asking if I thought that I could become a manager. He said, "I think you could do this. You have a good eye for the floor, and you seem to be very good with the people you work with, and I think that you should consider maybe moving over to the management side." So I started to give it some thought. I started to look around and see what positions might be available. I liked the restaurant I was working in at the time, but there just really wasn't anything available for me there. As far as management, there weren't any openings. So I had applied for a position as a service director, which I thought was the most logical progression from where I was currently at that point, because up until that point, I had only worked on the front of house side of things, and I really didn't have much experience on the back end, on the back of house side. So I thought that a service director position might make the most amount of sense, because we were working in a very service-oriented position. We were working in a restaurant where the details really mattered, the steps of service really, really mattered. Those were really ingrained, and those were really discussed every day. So when I took the first position and I interviewed for the job, I remember that the general manager at the restaurant I was starting at, I don't know if I'm allowed to use names. I don't know if you
No, you can.
I don't know if you want names here. I worked
can.
At a restaurant on the Upper West Side of New York called Dovetail, which was a really beautiful, small little jewel box of a restaurant on the Upper West Side. I remember when I started there. Interestingly,
for the listeners, so it's John Fraser. It was John Fraser's restaurant. John has now gone on to all kinds of acclaim, tons of restaurants. But I actually helped open that restaurant as the maitre d'. They had a Michelin star. They had 2 Michelin stars for a little while, right?
I don't know if they got a second. They definitely had one.
Did they ever?
While I was there, when I started there, they had already gotten the 1, and they kept the 1 all throughout up until they closed. Because that restaurant closed in, I think, 2018, I want to say. But this was a little while back. But I remember when I started, I interviewed for the position. They were very excited to get me in because I came from fine dining, but I was at that right moment in which I had enough experience to know what should happen on a floor, but not too much experience that I was overqualified for a position, because it's tricky getting a manager just at the right time for what's essentially a junior position. What made things a little trickier for me was that I was coming in as the service director, and I was taking over for the current service director there, who was stepping back into a captain's role there. So I was in essence being tasked with managing my predecessor. So he wasn't leaving the restaurant. He was reverting back to a tipped hourly position. So it made for an interesting transition for me. And that required some tact and some diplomacy, but it ultimately worked out very well. Him and I are friends to this day, and we keep in touch. So that was my first management position.
So then talk to me about that. It's funny because I remember a lot about you going there, and I didn't remember that that detail that you were managing your predecessor. Challenges for sure. Talk to me about what did you, and I don't even know if you could put yourself in that headspace, like what did you know about management? What did you know like a manager had to do or should do or whatever, and what did you not realize until you had gotten sort of into the trenches, if you can think back that far?
Well, I think up until that point, I thought I had a pretty good sense of what it is that it meant to manage a staff, because I had worked, by that point, I had worked in about 3 or 4 different restaurants that had Michelin stars, and I'd worked in high volume restaurants as well. And I thought that it meant, walking around the floor, telling people what they should be doing, and then getting a meal at the end, and then making my way home. That's kind of what I thought it was. I thought it was leading pre-shift.
And that's the way it is in many restaurants.
That's the way it is in a lot of restaurants. And I remember my first week in that management position, my general manager, my boss, pulled me aside and said, 90% of managing is don't mess with their money, don't mess with their schedule. He said that's 90% of it. He said the other 10 you'll learn, you'll figure it out, but that's a big chunk of it. And that's a bit of an exaggeration. There's a whole lot more to it than just that, obviously. But those were the very first lessons that I learned, because my very first weekend, I was charged with making a schedule. Or taking the schedule on, and you realize that it does require quite a bit of diplomacy and tact, and that you have people that have been there for a while that have set schedules, you have people that have lives, you have people that have children and babysitters and daycare and religious observations, and you're trying to balance the needs of a business with the needs of your staff. And I think a lot of managers make the mistake of being very cavalier with their staff members' lives. But what keeps a restaurant functioning and working and profitable is the idea of employee retention, and honoring someone's time, honoring someone's schedules and their commitments, and making sure that you don't make a mistake there. That goes a long way. So I learned that lesson very quickly.
Talk to me about some of the hard lessons. Well, let me back up here. Did you feel like it was a good transition, you moving from, because you said, hey, you thought a service director position made the most sense. And this is really a position you find in a lot of fine dining restaurants. Stephen and I obviously both were sort of raised in fine dining here in New York City. But did you feel like that did make sense? Was it as an easy transition as you sort of hoped it would be?
I feel like that was a really good transition, just because you're moving from what you know from before, and you're bringing that as a strength into the position that you're being tasked with. I was not an operations person at that point. I was not someone that was well versed in, permits and the DOB and HVAC and all the things that go along with what a general manager or a director of operations might have to be handling. I was not versed in that. And to have the culture shock of going from an hourly tipped position into a salaried position where now I'm supervising people, I think that I would have been at a severe disadvantage if I wasn't able to bring the skill set that I had from before into this position. Now, what I learned and what I have subsequently tried to teach to junior managers who are moving into their first management position is, looking back, I can see that some of the mistakes that I made and some of the mistakes that I see that are very common with younger managers moving into their first role. When you are a server, when you're a captain, if you're a waiter, a front waiter, whatever you want to call it, the idea of assisting where needed and helping out and jumping in and solving a problem that you see at a table or in a fellow server's section or in a different area of the floor, you feel the desire to do that. And I think young managers, and certainly I was guilty of it at the very beginning, you see a problem and you want to go and you want to fix it. But you learn very quickly that, depending on the size of your floor, there might be 4 waiters, there might be 10 waiters, there might be 6 captains, whatever you want to have it. But there's probably only 1 manager, maybe 2, or some big house, maybe 3. But the idea of your section as the manager is now the restaurant. It's now the floor. And if you keep jumping into these tables and putting out these fires, you're not managing the people that are supposed to be handling these problems. So it really, it does you a disservice. You want to get in there and you want to help, and the desire should be there to do it. But that was definitely one of the lessons that I learned quickly, and the mistakes that I made that I needed to correct was that, if you're constantly putting out fires and constantly solving someone's problems, well, then the problem isn't the fires. It's maybe the person whose section is continually falling apart.
Yep. So talk to me, because you've obviously, so from Dovetail, you worked at a ton of restaurants, since then. You've since become more versed in operations and all of that. And I just want to focus in here because you said, you can't do that. But when you're training a new manager, how do you tell them it's not a matter of what not to do, but it's also a matter of what to do, what they should be focusing on instead. So talk to me in that one area, because I think it's a common problem that a lot of managers have. You had it, I had it when I first started managing. You just want to dive in, but we're not firefighters, and we're not used to our fullest if we're just firefighters. So how do you teach them what they should be doing?
So, listening to your podcasts, I know that you like to start it off with a quote where there's people that see, there's people that will never see, and there are people that can see when shown.
Yep.
And I think that the large majority of management are the ones that fall into that third category, that can see when shown. I think that when you're hiring for the position, that making sure that you have a very, very clear job description is very, very important. And not having someone have the sense of, I am a manager, I need to manage, because that's such a ambiguous word and such an ambiguous term. So having a very, very clear job description, having a very, very clear set of guideposts and standards, having a very clear set of, having a very clear training outline, that this is not just a 1-week training outline or a 2-week training outline, but this is an ongoing process that we're going to check your progress in a month, 3 months. I have a junior manager. Let's just say junior manager. I have a younger manager working for me right now who we sat down and did a performance review after 6 months, and we did a review after a year. And we've talked about the what we look to see and where we look to see the growth. And I think it starts with the work that happens off of the floor. Making sure that they are well-versed in your building, making sure that they are well-versed in the back end, the office responsibilities, what it is that they are responsible for, what they're not, making sure that they are they're aware of what they are not responsible for as of yet. With younger managers, with less experienced managers, I've always found that a better place to start for them is with things like dry goods, dry storage, paper inventory, coffee inventory, tea inventory, getting to know the nuts and bolts of the building, getting to know the nuts and bolts of what it is that we have, how much we have of it, before they're tasked with any kind of ordering, any kind of financial responsibilities. It gives them a more rounded view of the floor. So that way, when you have that server who says, we're all out of coffee cups, your manager can say, we're not. I know where they are. I know how many we have. I'm going to break some out. So really kind of starting from the outside and then working your way into service itself. So by the time that they do step on the floor, they're aware of all the things that are on the back end. They're all aware of all the things that we have in storage. They're aware of all the things that are coming in today. They're aware of all the things that are coming in tomorrow. So I think before there's even a moment in service, if you can start with that idea, those aspects of building them up slowly, it makes the work on the floor itself a little bit easier to do.
I want to go back to you at Dovetail. When did you feel, and maybe it didn't happen at Dovetail, I assume it did, but can you remember a point when you realized, like, hey, I now know what I'm doing here. Like, I know how to be a good manager. I've now graduated. I was a captain and now I was managing, but now I feel like I can really do this well. Can you remember, like, when it felt that way and why you ended up feeling that way?
To be honest with you, I don't think that it felt that way for me there. I think I felt that way about Dovetail after I left Dovetail. I left Dovetail to take a job working for Chris Cannon, who was a legendary New York restaurateur and operator and owner. He built a massive restaurant in New Jersey, in Morristown, New Jersey, which is about, I want to say, 15,000 square feet. It was this massive 3-floor operation that had 2 kitchens, 4 dining rooms, 3 different menus going at the same time. That was the job that I took after Dovetail. I actually got recruited from Dovetail, and I moved to New Jersey to open this restaurant. And I was the opening service director there. A friend of mine was the opening general manager for it. And we started from scratch. We did not know New Jersey restaurants at all. We didn't know any of the restaurants out there. We didn't really know any of the talent pool out there. And we needed about 70 front of house staff members to open the building because it was a big operation. So we had to hire. We did an open call for about a week. And when you don't know any of the restaurants out there and someone's handing you a resume and you don't know any of the names on it, you can't really go off of reputation. You're really interviewing people and you're getting a feel for them based off of personality. You're getting a feel for them based off of what you think their work ethic is going to be like. So we were asking them questions like, what do you like to cook at home? Describe the ideal meal for yourself. Can you remember a job where you failed? What do you take away from that? What are you looking to learn at the next position that you go to, wherever that might be? So I think building up that restaurant, we spent about a month just doing service demonstrations and service classes and teaching a whole staff out there about food and about wine and about beverage and about the steps of service that we wanted for this building. And not just for the building, but we had different styles of service in the different rooms in the building itself. So I think going through that and feeling validated and seeing the lessons that I had learned at Dovetail that I was now bringing to this restaurant and watching this restaurant flourish, it made me feel a lot better about what I had learned at Dovetail and saying, I think I was going in the right direction here. So I think that I never felt truly 100% comfortable with how I was at Dovetail. I was told by the people that I worked for and worked with that they thought I was doing well, but I didn't feel validated until I had left and said, oh, okay, I see it now.
Yeah. And Steven's a really great manager. One of the things that I like most about how you manage is your demeanor. You're cool, you're calm, you're collected. Like I don't think I've ever seen you get flustered or sort of animated. And I'm sure it's happened, but you're just really calm and cool. And that extends out because there's a lot of times when you're a manager, you get a lot of pressure from above, either from your boss or your owner or whatever. And, shielding the staff, I think is part of the job. And likewise, right, the stress that comes from the bottom up, shielding, the other people above you because they've got other bigger issues to worry about. You're dealing with the stress that you're supposed to deal with, and you've always managed that. You've always managed that really well, which is not me, which is not my style, which is not my personality, and I've tried for a long time to sort of cultivate that. And it's always nice working with you and watching you do that. So my next question is sort of. Is that true? Do you feel stressed and you just shield it really well? Or?
Are all of the things that you just said about me true? Is that the question?
That's right.
If they're flattering, then yes, first. They are true. No, I think it's good to have a healthy, a couple things. It's good to have a couple of things. Number one, it's good to have a healthy work-life balance. It's important to do that. I know far too many people in this industry, and I'd like to think that it's changing. But I know far too many people in this industry that wear the amount of hours that they work per week on their sleeve like some badge of honor. I know kitchen guys who, I put in a 90-hour work week. Well, then what's going wrong that you need to put 90 hours in? There's something, the math is off somewhere, or people that put in, consistently a 14-hour day when, 10 hours should suffice. If you can't get the work done in 10 hours and you need the 14 hours every day, then there is something off about the workload that you carry. There's something off in the math there. And also, I'm a believer that, there's always more work to do tomorrow. So if you've accomplished the work that you need to get done today and it's taken you 9.5 hours instead of the 10.5, I don't need you to stick around for the extra hour to prove to me that you're doing the work. I can see that the work is being done. That's one lesson.
Yeah, I hope that's something that changes. I hope that's something that changes.
I really do, because I think that there's far too many people that get burned out in this industry, and it's a stigma. And I think that a lot of people are a little afraid to cut out a half an hour earlier than they do because they think that it's viewed as them shirking their responsibility. If you're getting the work done, you're getting the work done. And there's more work to do tomorrow. There's always, the restaurant's never finished. There's always more.
Yeah.
So don't worry, there will be more work for you tomorrow.
But here's the other piece to it, is that oftentimes managers are utilized as sort of overseers, as babysitters.
Yes.
Right? We're there to open the doors and turn on the lights, and we got to be there at the end to lock the doors and turn out the lights. And I think, I don't know how we get away from that one, but it's a little bit of like hey, I'm hanging around for what? I'm hanging around just to just to make sure the lights get turned out. It's that's a frustrating piece
Well,
to it
I mean,
as well.
the thing is, if I need you to hang around to turn off the lights at the end, why am I bringing you in so early? Why? You can come in a little bit later if you need to turn the lights off. And if you came in the morning and you turned the lights on, I can get you out a little bit earlier. That there shouldn't be.
Yeah.
If this restaurant can run with one manager, then at what point do we need three of us on the floor? What point do we need three of us hanging around at the same time? But I think the other aspect of it is going back to what you were saying before is, I had a very valuable lesson taught to me by a friend of mine in the industry who has been a general manager and a wine director and a beverage director and a director of ops. She said, part of managing successfully is understanding what it is that you're responsible for and letting go of the things that you're not responsible for. For the owners, you're responsible for everything, and that's a choice that you make. But as far as on the management side, she worked for a restaurant owner that had a septic tank for their restaurant, and she'd have to explain to the owner on the P&L why their service contract for their plumber was so high. And she said, "Well, look, you decided to put a septic tank in. I can only tell you what the number is and explain it. Doesn't mean that I'm responsible for it. This is ultimately a decision that was yours." So I think that having the healthy understanding of what it is that you're responsible for on your P&L is what you're responsible for, and what you're not, you have to understand the number. You have to demonstrate how the numbers are related to each other, but it's best not to lose too much sleep over that.
Today's episode of Restaurant Strategy is also brought to you by 7 Shifts. 7 Shifts is a team management platform built specifically for restaurants. Great restaurants are built by great teams, and 7 Shifts is your secret weapon to better understand your restaurant, hit labor targets, and keep your entire team connected. With drag-and-drop scheduling, in-app communication, task management, tip management, and more, it makes restaurant work a lot easier. From back of house to front of house, managers, franchise owners, and even larger corporate teams, 7 Shifts has benefits at every single level. Plus, it integrates with the other systems your restaurant already uses, like your POS and your payroll. Turn your team into your competitive advantage. Restaurant Strategy Podcast listeners get 3 months absolutely free. Get started at 7shifts.com/restaurant strategy. That's the number 7, SHIFTS.com/restaurant strategy to get 3 months absolutely free and join over 30,000 restaurants using 7 Shifts today. Yes, you will find that link in the show notes. So talk to me about that, and I want to talk about your continued development through management, to talk about that, to dig a little deeper there, which is that, making sure that managers have their areas of responsibility, and how do you do that, and what do you think managers should be responsible for? And I'll use this to say that I spend a lot of time talking about how we don't have managers in most restaurants. We have overseers, we have firefighters, we've got babysitters, right? They exist to make sure that nothing goes wrong and to put out fires when something does go wrong.
Yes.
And yet really what we should be doing is managing for profitability. Like,
absolutely.
a business exists to increase shareholder value, right? The purpose of a firm is to increase shareholder value. Milton Friedman told us that a long time ago. We have to make money. It has to make profit. If not, there's no reason for the business to exist. So talk to me a little bit about areas of responsibility, and then specifically how we start talking about managing for profitability.
Well, I think it's very important in any restaurant where, as senior management, that you develop a manager matrix, that there are clearly delineated responsibilities for your managers. There are the general responsibilities that everybody has. If you're opening and you're working, someone's making a floor plan. Someone's putting, the bar bank in the drawer, and someone's
Yep.
making sure the lights are on, and someone's making sure the music's playing, and someone's making sure the internet's not down. Everyone's always responsible for all of that. But there are other elements in which, you need to have clearly delineated lines of responsibility. You have one manager that's responsible for the schedule. You have one manager that's responsible for uniforms or lockers or coffee and tea. We have one of my managers responsible for making sure that inventory is kept up, and that we're not low or 86 to any of that. And I think that within those, because every manager that you speak to, every person that you interview for a job, they always say, well, I want to learn the financials. I want to learn a little bit more. It's the most common refrain when I like to always ask anybody that I'm interviewing for a job, what it is that you'd like to learn in the next place you go to, wherever that might be. And the most common answer is, I'd like to get a better understanding of the financials of the restaurant. Well, it's no great secret. There's plenty of opportunities to learn the financials. It's just that you might start on a smaller scale. So the manager that's in charge of the coffee and tea inventory or ordering understands what our budget is for that, and understands how that budget is related to the overall revenue of the restaurant itself. And if that inventory is being kept up, if you're not keeping people in the dark as far as the profitability of the restaurant, how we're doing on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, keeping people informed of where we're at. The biggest learning curve, the biggest learning lesson for me was learning just about percentages. I remember the very first P&L meeting that I sat in, I said, oh my goodness, I was a junior manager. I said, wow, we're doing great. And I needed my owner to point at the bottom line and say, yeah, we made $700,000, but it took us $750,000 to make that. So I don't know what doing great sounds to you. That doesn't seem like doing great to me. So I learned very, very quickly that a budget is a guidepost. But as long as you are keeping track of the percentages and making sure that everything is in relation to everything else, that's a wonderful way for a younger manager to grow because, keeping tabs on something small like paper goods, not small, but important, paper goods, so keeping tabs on that, on your budget, that might be, you might have that budgeted at 2.7%. If you keep that at 2.5, great. If that gets above to 3.1, maybe that's a little high. Is it going to break your P&L? No. But for that manager who's responsible for that, that is their lifeblood. And then eventually from there, you grow that from paper goods becomes, I'm going to keep you tracking all of our variable expenses. You can't control the fixed costs. That's a different story. But that grows to the variable costs. And then suddenly you're taking a look at that. Suddenly you're looking at things just beyond paper goods. You're looking at things like china, glass, and silverware. You're looking at breakage. You're looking at the things that go beyond that. And then eventually, as you grow into, say, an AGM position or a general management position, you're looking at all the cogs. You're looking at all the things that go into the budget from there. You're looking at all the things that go into the P&L from there. And that starts on like a minute level. It starts as a building block. And then as you get stronger with that, that grows and grows and grows. And that kind of information is what ultimately informs you on the floor. So if you know what your budget is for glassware in a month or in a quarter, the quarter is a better way to look at it as opposed to a month by month. You see the trends in breakage. That's a conversation in pre-shift. That's a discussion with your staff. That's talking about not being cavalier with how we're throwing things out in the dish pit and losing forks every week. My very, very first restaurant job, I was a busboy in the Diamond Club at Shea Stadium. I was 17 years old, and I remember at the end of the night, we counted silverware. We counted it and we wrapped it. And at the time, I thought it was the dumbest thing. I wouldn't necessarily subject staff to that now, but it's important to do an inventory. It's important to get those into spreadsheets or onto platforms to chart that and to market that. Because the younger manager that says, I want to learn the financials, learning the financials is about applying these real world, real time circumstances and learning the consequences of those. The consequences hit the P&L.
So talk to me about then, again, your trajectory then. When did you start, when did you move up from now a couple service director positions? When did you move up beyond that? And talk to me about then again, that transition for you.
Well, in my Jersey restaurant, my friend who was my general manager, by the end of my tenure there, his role was basically a director of operations role in everything except title. And my role by the time I left there was, he tells me to this point, he says, you could list general manager on your resume, and I would not, disagree with that. You were managing that restaurant on a senior level at that point. But when I got back to the city, I moved back to New York after a couple of years being in New Jersey, and I worked for Tom Colicchio for about 4 years. I started in the Beekman Hotel in Lower Manhattan. And we opened a restaurant that at the time was called Fowler and Wells, but then eventually changed its name to Temple Court. I started there, and I got promoted very quickly to be the assistant general manager there. And I worked there for about a year, and then got promoted to become the general manager of Temple Court, which was in recognition of just the overview of seeing how everything kind of came together in that restaurant. But I really think that, the place where I really understood the role was when I moved from that restaurant to Craft, which was the flagship restaurant for Tom Colicchio for Crafted Hospitality. I was there for about 2 years as the general manager there. And that was the place where I really, the idea of all the other elements that really go into general management take over your day-to-day life. It was an old building. The infrastructure's not as ideal as it could be. And I really learned the value of a really good handyman, a really good plumber, a really good electrician, a really good HVAC company. And you really see how all of these things that are what you think are tangential to a restaurant are very important to its bottom line. And you can spend a lot of money and have a lot of money hit your P&L, or you have a lot of money that goes towards CapEx projects that the guest might never see, that your staff might never see, but you certainly feel. And that was a restaurant where when we sat down to do P&Ls, and do our P&L review on a monthly basis, it really got, the responsibilities for a recap and an overview really got delineated out to the departments. And that was a very valuable lesson, that the back of house, the kitchen, would have to come to the P&L review and really talk about their food cost. And at the front of house, my service director that worked for me would come and talk about our labor cost and talk about how we're budgeted and why we were hitting a certain number and why we weren't. My beverage director would come and really talk about our beverage cost and controllable expenses, and the other gaps are things that I would fill in. So that was really the restaurant where it all kind of came together for me, and I really learned how all of these parts where you're all you feel like you might be living in your own little world, you might be a little separate, they really all come together.
Yeah, it's funny because I talk a lot because, again, another restaurant where I worked as well. I was there for 2007 and 8, and I feel the same way. I felt like sitting through a lot of those books meetings, the budget meetings once a month was really informative, and I still talk about it. I talk about it with the members of the mastermind that I run. Like a lot of the ideas that because there was so much transparency there in that place from top to bottom. Like, this is what we made, this is what we did, this is what everyone did to get us to this point.
Yes.
So for
and
sure,
I will add this too, not to plug the restaurant that I'm at right now. not to plug them, but I will say that my current restaurant, Il Buco, I feel that there is more transparency with how we are financially amongst the management team and structure than in any restaurant that I've ever worked at. That this is a restaurant where even the manager, who is a low person on the totem pole, they're responsible for putting in our numbers into a declining budget and seeing how that is changing and fluctuating day to day and week to week. We're putting our labor numbers in there. We're really working off of this document, this sheet. I know there are platforms for it, and platforms can help utilize that, but sitting down in a meeting every week and discussing it in the manager meeting and understanding why the numbers are what they are goes a long way into someone understanding how those numbers can change, how you can affect change to the bottom line, how the decisions that you make in service, before service, the decisions that you make, in the manager meetings can have a real effect and influence on the profitability of your restaurant.
Yep. So I want to go back because I now want to merge 2 points that you've made, because again, the sort of the thrust of this conversation is about managers, new managers, how you train them, how you make good ones, and how you develop them so that they become better and that they're ready for promotion. But you said a couple of things here. Number one, we're just talking about transparency. And then a few minutes ago, you were talking about how you just give them a little something to be responsible for, that make sure that they understand what they're responsible for and what they're not. And I think those two things go hand in hand. Because when they're responsible for their little garden, right? They just tend their garden. It's part of the larger farm. They understand in time, this is all you have to do. And if you do this well, this is how it then affects, because then this radical transparency idea is like, and now you see how everybody is responsible for their own little gardens, and this is the end result. And that clicked for me at Kraft, understanding everybody's little gardens, because then after a little while, then I was paying attention to what other people were doing in their garden, and I started coming up with just building my theories about it, my philosophies about it, and understanding, hey, I think we could be doing better. It wasn't my responsibility, but hey, I think we could do better if we would fix this or that, and it was. I think those two things are really, really important as we're training managers. Some of the most successful restaurants I've ever worked for had this just open books, and I think some of the restaurants that I see struggle is that they struggle to be transparent. And can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, of all the places you've worked, were they all transparent? Were some of them really guarded?
Some
P&Ls?
Some of them were very guarded P&Ls. Some of them, not all management would sit in a P&L meeting. First of all, some of them, not all management would even get the P&L. I remember a restaurant. I'm not going to name names here. I don't want to besmirch people, but I remember a restaurant that I worked at in which I was not senior management, and I would not get the P&L sent to me. So I really had no idea how we were doing. And I was in charge of making the schedule for the front of house staff. So I really had no idea what my labor cost was. I was not being given the access to the financials. I was not being given the access to the sales. I was not being given access to our percentages. So I was kind of operating in the dark, and I mean, the analogy, think about driving a car and turning the headlights off. You don't know. You don't know if you're going in the right direction. You don't know if you're about to drive off a cliff. I think that the idea of giving people the transparency, giving people the clear budgeting in mind, giving people goals and realistic goals and targets, because a budget is a guidepost. And I think what's most important are really the percentages that you're looking for. You could run a pizza stand and say, our budget is $1 million, our budget is $1 billion, but if the percentages are all in line, it doesn't matter what that number is. It really doesn't. It comes down to the percentages. It comes down to trying to stay within this percentage. If you are doing a weekly forecast, if you are forecasting correctly, and you're giving people a realistic sense of what the forecast is for the week to come, and you're using all the information and all the tools that you have at your disposal, because there are so many wonderful platforms to help you really get a very, very solid, very, very close forecast. Very, very close to a number. You can do that. If you're using that and you are sharing that information with your staff, you're giving them clear indications of where it is that they're supposed to be going. So the other trick, I think, is that the responsibilities that you delineate to a younger staff member might, as long as they start small and then work your way up, it could be different based off of the restaurant. And what I mean by that is this. I've worked in a couple of restaurants now at this point in my career in which, and I know, Chip, you have as well, that you have staff members that have been there for a very long time. You have restaurants where you have a lot of staff, some staff members with a lot of seniority. And with that seniority, a lot of them have schedules that are set in stone. I have a couple of servers that work for me now that have been at my restaurant for 15 years. I have a couple of people in the kitchen that have been in my restaurant for nearly 25 years at this point. And they don't necessarily need to get a schedule sent to them because their schedule has not changed in 10 years. That can be a blessing and that can be a curse, because I
want to talk about this.
If your labor cost starts to run high, you need to start making some tough but necessary decisions for the restaurant. And as a senior manager, I understand that putting a younger junior manager in charge of those difficult conversations is probably not in their best interest nor your best interest. That's why you're in senior management. Sometimes the tougher decisions and the tougher conversations happen that have to happen for you. If you're working in a restaurant that might have just opened, where no one really has seniority. And you need to make difficult decisions as far as the schedule and as far as the labor to bring costs in line. You might feel a little bit more comfortable with having somebody who might not have nearly as much experience, maybe taking on some of those tougher conversations. But that could be substitute any purveyor,
Yep. So talk to me about now you're a general manager, you've been a GM for years. I'm a really big proponent of forecasting, using those projections to generate budgets in all the key areas.
Absolutely.
I always talk about, I use the football analogy, right? 11 players on the field. The offensive lineman does not know what the other 10 guys, maybe knows what another 2 or 3 guys are doing, does not understand who the hot receiver is, what all the routes that everybody's running. He just knows, I got to take this guy and block him that way. The other guy's I got to block this guy. I got to push him that way. That's only, and I know if I do this, that's what I'm supposed to do on this play. If I succeed at this, there's a good chance that the entire play will succeed because all 11 guys just have to execute their portion of it. So talk to me about how you actually go about budgeting, because for me, I would say we fall into this trap. And tell me if you've heard this one before. Like, hey guys, listen, we really got to watch labor this weekend. Let's really stay on top of it. And we're so guilty of saying this, and everybody's like, yeah, okay, I know. I want to do what you're asking me to do, and yet we give them nothing tangible. Rather than, hey, listen, so-and-so called out Tuesday, Wednesday, so we had to call the daytime guy in for the nighttime. He went into overtime, so we got 8 hours of overtime. That equals X number of dollars. We have to shave $400 off of the payroll over Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That's tangible. And I always say, like, we never hit our profit goals. We never hit our profit goals, by shaving hours. We hit our targets. We hit our margins. We hit our percentages on the schedule. So talk to me about how the blinder analogy is how I think about it. How do you think about it, especially when you're trying to bring a new service manager, a junior manager, and trying to teach them sort of the areas they need to stay within?
Well, I think the 11 guys in the field analogy is very apt as far as the offensive lineman understanding that, I block to the right here and I take this man these 2 steps. But they go over the whole play with the whole team. Everyone on the team is aware of what the objective of the play is. So if I'm blocking to the right, it's to create this hole, to create this opening for the running back to go through to veer left. I might not understand how that is done by him, but I understand what the ultimate goal is. So I think that, going back to what you talked about earlier as far as my demeanor in service, it's, you need to have a long view about some of these things. You're not going to make, your goals for the month on a Saturday. You're not going to make them on a Tuesday. You're going to make them over the course of, 29 days or 30 days or a 31-day month. So understanding the peaks and valleys of it, understanding you're going to have a higher labor cost on a slower day and a lower labor cost on a busier day. And the whole goal is to look at the week or look at the month and see what our ultimate target is. There is an understanding that, that not every day is going to look the same as far as sales. Not every day is going to look the same as far as costs. If you can budget that out, you can forecast that out over the course of a week, over the course of a month, over the course of a quarter. I think the more specific that you can get with your budgeting, I've seen budgets in which, going back to China glass and silverware, I've seen budgets in which they have, I'm using just round numbers, but someone has $1,000 budgeted for glassware, and that $1,000 is the same number for January through December. Some months you're not going to spend any money on glassware, and some months you might double your budget for glassware. So looking at that on a quarter, looking at that on a 6-month period, you really have to, the people that are in an area that can influence this, such as someone who is making a schedule, looking at how that schedule is out. There are some wonderful scheduling platforms, 7 Shifts, Schedule Fly, Hot Shifts, whatever you're using. There are labor forecast models in there, forecasting your labor to your sales, understanding what the percentages are, understanding what's realistic and what is achievable. You have the marketer, the operator who says, I want a 4% labor cost for this month. I don't know what planet they're on, but understanding what that is, understanding what your realistic targets should be for the month that you're operating in, because in New York it's also it's seasonal. Our busy times are the holidays in October, November, December. Our slow time is in the summer. My restaurant in particular, our busiest month of the year is May. It's graduation season. We're located very close to NYU, and we have a whole slew of private events that occur during a 3-week period in May. We participate in the Open Streets program, so we have outdoor dining that nearly doubles the size of our restaurant. Understanding what our targets are for that month, taking advantage of the times of your year in which you are going to be busy and making sure that you are managing your costs then, and understanding the periods of your year that are going to be slower and really managing your costs then. But just making sure that the people that are in a position to control the expenses and influence those expenses, making sure that they are aware of, the lines that their crayon should stay within. They can color within, I should say.
I always say, right, like we are in the unenviable position of having a business running a business that has not one, not two, but 3 moving targets, right? Revenue is variable, therefore, so are COGS, and so is labor. And they're all moving, and we have to get them moving together, often easier said than done. If it goes up, the others can go up. If it goes down, the others got to come down. That's the challenge. And for everybody that's in this industry, I spend a lot of time talking about this with the members of the mastermind that I run. Listen, you picked it. We're here. You could have picked an easier industry, could have picked an easier business model. We've got a very challenging business model. This is what it is. So if you want to figure out how to do that profitably, how to do that, bring some consistency to the returns, this is what we need to do.
Yeah.
I want to ask about, so how did you know when you were ready to move from just the service side into taking on more responsibility, understanding more about operations, and really getting that full view to step into a general manager role and beyond?
Well, honestly, I think it got to the point where I'd worked for some really good managers as a server, I started as a busser, I was a food runner. I always joke I was a very, very terrible barista. I am to this day. It's beyond my capabilities. I was a bartender very briefly. I'd like to think that I was a good server, but I got to the point where, when you're coming up and you're learning from people, you view this as, well, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do what they do. I don't know how they do what it is they do, but I can't do that. And I think I got to the point where I just, I was in a restaurant that I cared about very, very deeply. I really cared about the service and the hospitality and the guest experience. And I cared about, there's a really, really great quote that a man is whatever room he is in. So you have people that want to be actors, you have people that want to be musicians, you have people that want to be writers. But if you are a waiter and you are in the dining room, you are a waiter. That's who you are right now. That's what you are doing. So you might not necessarily like what it is that you're doing, but you should take pride in how you do it. You should bring a work ethic to what it is that you're doing. And I think the people that progress are the people that take pride in the job that they're doing, because so many doors can be opened to you in life just off of how you present yourself, how you carry yourself, the respect that you bring to a position and the ethic that you bring. So I got to the point where I was in a restaurant and I looked around and I said, maybe not here, but I see things that can be fixed, and I see problems that can be solved, and I see things that can be tightened up, and I have ideas for how to do that. So if this is not the restaurant to do that, or if this isn't the place where I can do that now because there might not be something available, I want to find a place where I can get in there and bring a fresh set of eyes and bring some ideas to the table and let my voice be heard as far as that goes, and really let my, the experience that I now have, being in this industry for a little bit of time, and having a well-rounded background as far as working in a couple of different positions and seeing the restaurant from a couple of different perspectives. I said, I want to do that now. And then you get into management and then you realize, I don't really know anything. There's so much more to learn. There's so much more that I didn't know that was on the back end of it. on the other side that isn't shown to the service staff. There's so many things that happen in the office. There's so many things that happen in an email or report or a directive from your owner that the service staff is not aware of. And that's also a big part of the job, deciding what it is that they need to know and then deciding what it is that you need to hold to yourself and how you present that information. You're a translator in that sense, because you might have an owner that wants something done a certain way, and then there's the restaurant speak, there's the restaurant language, and you have to interpret your owner or your operator's wishes and translate that into action. You need to translate that into something actionable on a floor, and then vice versa. You might have your staff telling you there's only a certain way that we can do something. Your owner might want it done a certain way, but you need to be able to translate the restaurant language, the actionable language, into owner speak. So there's a lot to it as far as that end as well. You learn that, and that comes with experience. But what's most important for a younger manager coming up is knowing that, number one, you have the support of the people that you are answering to, that you should not feel afraid to ask questions if you don't know something, and also to just be exposed to all these things slowly, to be brought along, those small little aspects of the financials that then grow, that you are responsible for. You grow, you get more responsibility brought onto that after, and then before you know it, you're responsible for a lot, and you see how all the parts kind of are linked together. Your analogy of the offensive lineman, at a certain point, you're the one drawing up the play. You're the one that is leading the 11 men and making sure that each of those 11 men on the field are aware of what it is that they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think this gets into the conversation of motivation, which is something that's endlessly fascinating to me. Daniel Pink wrote a book called Drive a couple of years ago, maybe 10 years ago at this point, but it's all about human motivation. And he says in the book, for centuries, millennia, we've been sort of motivating people with one of two things, either the carrot or the stick. We dangle the carrot saying, if you do this, then you will be rewarded with something. Or we threaten the stick. If you don't do this, then you will be punished. And he makes a really compelling case, sharing all this sort of research and everything, saying actually humans are motivated by much deeper, much more interesting, much more complicated things. Just self-sufficiency. And he's like, why do we play video games? It's for neither the carrot or the stick. Why do we do puzzles? Why do we play pickup basketball? It's not so I can be good enough to make the NBA. I'm not. But it's fun. It's and what does it get you? It doesn't get you really anything. We just do it because we're passing time, because it's enjoyable just for the sake of doing it. And this sort of goes back to what you were saying a few minutes ago. Like, if you're in the room, that's what you are, and so do that as well as you can. And I actually think most people want to do a good job. And this goes back to something we were talking about maybe 20, 25 minutes ago, which is, again, this idea of, all right, guys, listen, you really got to watch labor costs today. And, everybody's like, yeah, I really do want to do it. I want to watch labor. But we're not giving them anything tangible to do to actually to accomplish the goal. And I think we could all do a much better job, because people genuinely do want to do a good job. Not because they're going to get rewarded, not because they're going to get punished if they don't do it necessarily, but just because they know what it means to do a good job. And I think that's worth quite a bit.
Yeah, and to just go one step further with you, I think what makes our industry so wonderful is that there are so many different ways in which it can be so rewarding. So many. Aside from just the very base human level of, as you said with the video game, of accomplishing something, there are so many different friendships that you make. There are so many different ways that this industry manifests reward to somebody, whether it be through food or wine or experience or whatever it might be. But there are so many different ways that it is so rewarding, which is I think a great reason why you find so many wonderful people in this industry, because they understand what it is. When they kind of crack the surface and when they get in it, and they really have that first tangible moment of, oh, this is for me. It's very tough to get out of it at that point. It's not something that a lot of people want to get out of. They enjoy it so much, and I think that being able to find that reward is very important.
Yeah, and I think the way that our industry is regarded, certainly in America, it's difficult. Over in Europe, it's a way of life. You could definitely, it's a sought after career path, and not so much in this country. But I think that's changing. I think that's over the last 10 years, I felt this can be a career path. And P.S. it could be also a career path without a college education. Like you can do it and do it really well and make really good money, sort of right out of the gate. Are you going to be a billionaire? Maybe not, but you can make pretty good money as long as you apply yourself and sort of.
But it can also be a career path to so many other things. Just because, as I said, it presents you the opportunity to interact with so many different people from so many different facets of life, who are in so many different circumstances and positions. And I know so many people who have had so many doors opened for them because of the ethic that they bring, the intelligence that they bring, the humility and the compassion that they bring. The people say, you might not have the experience doing this, but I see that you're a hard worker. I see that you're smart. I see that you're humble, and I'm going to give you an opportunity somewhere else. So it really does lend itself to whatever path you choose to go in your career, in your life. I think it's very important that I think that the restaurant industry is a very important one to at least dip your toe in the water at some point.
Yeah, I had somebody on the show a couple weeks ago, and they said, I wish it's been said, it's a cliche, but they said, I wish everybody worked in the service industry at least once in their life. Had one job, even if it was just for 3 months, because you learn so much by taking care of people, right? It's a hard thing to do. Not everyone can do it. Not everyone can do it well. Yeah. But it teaches you how to be humble and all that to serve people, to be there for somebody else's needs.
Teaches you patience. It teaches you time management. Teaches you humility. Teaches you manners. Restaurant people, I think they hold the door open for everybody more often than not. Yeah. A lot of pleases and thank yous. It teaches you how to go out and eat. It teaches you a lot.
I want to talk because I want to be respectful of your time. We're coming to the end of our time. I got 5 questions I ask everybody who's on the show, so we'll get to that in a second. I want to talk about what you think makes a good manager. Like, what are the qualities? Somebody has no idea. They're in your position, the position you were in at one point, the position I was in at one point, and they say, I don't know if I'm going to do this. I don't know if I want to do this. What are the qualities? What are the soft skills that you just have to come preloaded with? And then what are the things that somebody could teach themselves to become a really good, effective manager in our industry?
I think it's important that there's a humility to admit what you don't know. Okay. I think that's very important, to admit what you don't know. I think it's very important to have a genuine curiosity in the things that you don't know. I think the best managers are the ones who want to genuinely learn things that they do not know. So I'll go back to my terrible barista skills. I have not stopped trying. For some reason, it has escaped me. I cannot make I can make a cappuccino. I can make a passable, serviceable cappuccino. I will not stop trying to learn. I think that the managers who succeed are the ones who do not want to stop learning. There's always something to learn. There's something that they don't know that they can learn that can just be another tool in their toolkit. Whether it be back of house operations, I've had some successful managers that, they come in on their day off because they want to learn prep. They come in and they prep vegetables, or they learn how to debone a chicken. They come in and they learn how to break down a pig. They learn these things because it might not necessarily apply in their current job, or it might. You might get that guest that's really fascinated about something. I have managers that succeeded because they were interested in certain spirits, so they decided to have field trips to the local distillery or to the local, if there's a winery that's not too far away. The genuine curiosity in furthering their education. I think those people are the ones that tend to thrive. But then again, they tend to thrive in almost every profession, the people that do not stop learning. But I think that's a very, very important trait for a manager. I also think something that's very important for somebody who's starting out is the ability to not let the pressure get to you. I guess the best example is when the health department shows up. Everyone always has the red alert in restaurants, which, I understand it's a stressful time. You're really being put under the microscope. But, as long as your operation is being run the way it should, as long as things are being kept clean on a daily basis, as long as there's organization to your restaurant, both on the front and back of house side of things, the idea of you panicking and getting your staff in a panic or getting your guests in a panic, it's counterproductive. So it's an easy thing to say, but it's not an easy thing to teach. The idea of you coming with kind of, an inherent calmness and grace under pressure is very, very important too, I think. Because maybe not just the health department, but if your door gets backed up and, and you're half an hour, 45 minutes behind on reservations, and you have a sea of people getting angry in your face, staying calm, staying collected, staying cool and graceful, and apologizing and trying to do the best you can.
It's hard.
It's tough.
It's
tough.
hard. Yeah, it is. It is really hard. Again, because we want to take care of people, and
absolutely,
I was that guy for many, many years, running the front door, and it was it's not easy for sure. I think that's really good. I got these 5 questions. Are you down?
Fire away.
Great. What's the last great meal you had?
Ooh, the last great meal I had. I've had a couple recently. I went to a restaurant last night with my wife in Dumbo called Vinegar Hill House, which we hadn't been to in a hot minute. Hadn't been there probably like 10 years. We had a great meal. Red wattle pork chop was lovely, and there was an appetizer of English peas and favas and ricotta, and it was really wonderful. That was a really good meal. That was 24 hours ago.
Spring on a plate. I love it. Okay, second question. What's the last great hospitality touch you've received?
Well, all right, this is maybe not a hospitality touch, but I'm a sucker for this. My wife hates it when I do this, but there was a period of time which, everyone always wants to see the kitchen, but I would go to restaurants and I'd want to see their dish pit. I think that the hallmark for a restaurant for their organization is how your dish pit's organized. So I had a couple of operators who would go, yeah, no problem, let me show it to you. And it would be really, really lovely and really, really well organized and well maintained. The Metro shelves are put together really well, and you can see the order for getting things washed and back in service in a timely fashion. And some would be a mess, and I said, oh, this restaurant's not going to last.
They're not going to make it.
I don't think they're going to make it. So I think the last good hospitality touch, I was in a restaurant outside of New York, and the operator said, do you want to take a tour of the back of house? And I said, sure. And I thought that they were going to show me the kitchen. The first place he took me was to the dish pit because he was so proud of how it was set up. And I thought, this restaurant is going to be in business for quite a while. It's got a good operation here. I thought that was a really good hospitality touch.
I love it. Okay, third question. Now, if a genie came down and could grant you one wish as it relates to this industry, what would it be? What would you wish for? You only get one.
I would wish that we didn't need to rely on tipping in order for people to have not just a sustainable lifestyle, but a comfortable lifestyle.
I love it. I love that. All right, number 4, what would you tell someone who's about to open their very first restaurant?
Don't.
No, that's the answer I get 4 out of 5 times.
I would say for the person that's opening their first restaurant, I would say don't, but I would also say think about what you're serving and what your rent costs.
Yeah.
Because your dream of what your cuisine is, you might not be able to afford that.
All right, last question. We're going to talk about the future of restaurants. So I want you to look 5 years down the line, and I want you to tell me, what do you think is coming that other people may not see coming?
I think that, like fashion, restaurants are cyclical. So I think that the trends of the mid to late 90s, like the big over-the-top, expansive Budokan Spice Market days, will come back because restaurants kind of, in a sense, they're reflective of the economy, but they also chase the economy. So I think just as the markets are cyclical and fashion is cyclical, there will be a period of this kind of over-the-top showmanship that returns. And I think in between now and 5 years from now, you're going to see the bare bones approach come back, in which everything is stripped of its essence. And you're going to get back to that point again where people say, I want a show. I want dinner and a show. If I'm spending this amount of money on my meal, I need more than just the meal. And I need more than just like some gruff demeanor. I need to be wowed.
Yeah, great. I love that. I think that's a good one. Listen, Stephen, this has been a great conversation.
It's been fun.
Any last words of wisdom you want to share? Anything we didn't touch on? Anything I forgot to ask?
I'd say just in restaurants as in life, whether it's an employee, whether it's an employer, whether it is a colleague or a coworker or a guest, the golden rule should always apply. Please treat people how you would like to be treated. You'd be amazed how much you can get out of them. You'd be amazed how much you can be forgiven. And you'd be amazed how far you can go just by treating people with decency, humility, and respect.
I love that. Where can people go to connect with you if they want to connect with you, learn more about you, learn more about the restaurants? Well, I'll include some of the links to the restaurants we talked about.
You can come visit me at Il Buco. We're on Bond Street in NoHo in Manhattan, located between Lafayette and Bowery. It's a wonderful restaurant. It's been around for a while. We celebrate our 30th anniversary next year. It is, every restaurant strives to be the kind of place where you can have a bowl of pasta and a glass of wine, but we are that place. And our pasta is made fresh. Our wine is fantastic. It's a beautiful room. It's a fun atmosphere. And it's the kind of restaurant you can go back to again and again.
I love it. It's a great restaurant. Stephen, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure.
So again, I want to thank Stephen for taking time out of his day to join us. Again, go visit him. He'll probably buy you a glass of wine if I knew Stephen well. Il Buco is a phenomenal restaurant in Manhattan. One of the real greats. Again, like he said, so just about to celebrate 30 years. Again, great insights on this show. This is one of those you might want to share with your managers. You might want to pass along to other owners and bookmark it. Go back and listen to it again because I think there's a lot of really great actionable insights in here. Again, I appreciate you guys being here as I appreciate you every single week. I know there's a lot of ways you can be spending your time. I appreciate you spending part of your week with me. Thank you very much, and I will see you next time.